carriera.
Mi sembra che l'intervento iniziale questa mattina del professor Gallego Roca, no? Ha fatto richiamo agli aspetti teorici del restauro, che sono certamente importanti, ha richiamato anche studiosi spagnoli che avevano contatti anche col mondo italiano e non solo quello, no? Quindi io penso che gli aspetti teorici sono importanti. Ricordo l'affermazione di un filosofo italiano abbastanza importante, che è Dario Antiseri, che dice: non c'è nulla di più pratico di una buona teoria, diciamo. Però detto questo, interessante sarebbe parlare appunto di questi due aspetti che la giornata prevedeva: la riflessione sugli strumenti e metodi dell'insegnamento e la presentazione e il confronto di alcuni progetti, la seconda parte della giornata, no? E lì c'è tanto da discutere, e nella presentazione che ho visto, penso alla Cripta Balbi, penso a Sant'Anna Pagani, alla Villa dei Quintili, a Notre Dame, entrano tanti problemi insieme che fanno capire la complessità del restauro, dove l'aspetto teorico è uno, ma non è tutto. Non so questo, Cristina.
Grazie.
Beh, una parola soltanto. Parlavo prima con Carlo Blasi, no? Che diceva appunto, ha detto la grande copertura in legno verrà ricostruita come era dov'era. Affermazione che può avere un carattere così astratto, teorico, ma in realtà non sarà proprio come era dov'era, perché cambiamenti ci saranno inesorabilmente. Quindi il problema non è tanto di utilizzare gli aspetti teorici, quanto poi di vedere come si riesce ad affrontare problemi che hanno, si è visto oggi, una complessità spaventosa, proprio spaventosa. Basta pensare anche all'ultimo intervento, quello su Villa dei Quintili, quanta interdisciplinarità è stata spiegata, no? Dalla nostra collega archeologa, no? E così tutti gli altri casi. Parliamo di Notre Dame e via dicendo. Questo è un punto qualificante del restauro e della formazione del restauro, la capacità di dialogare fra competenze diverse.
Grazie. Fare un po' di translation. Because for those of you who don't know Italian, difficult to translate the text of Professor Carbonara, but he's the latest talking about the complexity. So today what has been very revealed is the complexity of a site of conservation and these questions of how you go about that, which actually brings to my question of the cognitive side of it, because to deal with complexity, you need a particular setting in your mind to be able to do that. But he also was talking with Professor Blasi about the issues of the reconstruction. The com'era dov'era, which is this adagio, as the Italians say, since the fall of the Tower of Venice, that has been repeating for 100 years, is still there. But what Professor Carbonara say is that's the adagio, but the reality is not. The reality is not dov'era, com'era, where it was or how it was. It's different. It's a different construction. Also, the issue of the history, because, for example, with Professor Baragnoli and others, we always discuss that one of the reasons face sometimes architectural conservation is because the students don't know enough about history. But of course, it's again, like the cognitive skills is something that if they haven't done in their degree of architecture, you have a year or 2 or 3 to teach them, and it's not, how can you cover for that? But I don't know, some words, and we have architectural historians here as well in the room. We have Dr. Deborah Mays, who is the head of listing in Historic England. She's an architectural historian herself. So I don't know, do you have any comments to do about the issues of history? Or I think you all in your presentation revealed the importance of history. In the microphone. People online is saying if you can speak louder in the microphone.
Okay, can you hear me?
Online,
yeah.
People,
is that okay?
Yes.
Testing.
Yeah.
On the issue of conservation being complex, yes, it is. But it's only as complex as we want to make it complex and to continue making it complex. So I think one of the fundamental challenges that we have in the scientific, the academic, education and training world is to be able to translate that complexity into a language that others can understand, and particularly the owners of property that are of cultural significance, so that there is a commonality in the language between those that understand the complexity and those that actually do the work, and more importantly, the way that the building owners spend their money doing the work. So I think there is a fundamental challenge here to spread across the different disciplines and understanding with different degrees of interpretive ability being applied to get the message across. And in many ways, that's why throughout my latter career of over the last 20 years, 30 years or so, since the 1993 guidelines have come out, they are complex, but they are presented in a relatively understandable way that embodies the complexity, but in such a way that many people can understand them without being challenged by the complexity of conservation. It's a mechanism to translate this into practical reality to achieve the end result that is meaningful for all.
The complexity, for example, Villa Cryptavalvi is an example. No? To be confronted with that complexity of fabric is really challenging. So that's the complexity. In terms of dissemination, for others to understand, fine, but I'm talking about the competence of the architect has to deal with that, and how we build that competence, and how you teach, and they learn for that. You know, that's a complexity that we discussed. That it's not easy to make some sense, and it's about, you know, the collaboration, the archaeologists, all the team, and it's the communication that Sean was saying. It's all about that as well. But also we come from, I think one of the pressures when you go to the site, personally I found quite difficult, because it's all this different education, and you have to communicate, but people come from so many different, what is priority for them, and these clashes then happen in the building and shouldn't happen in the building. So we need to have a front, and that's why the guidelines say, you know, you have to collaborate, but in reality, it's limited again in the time we have. So how can we make more efficient that changes and that understanding of other profession? For example, I have sometimes found architects think that trans people are not educated, or and in fact they have as much education as architects. The same length of education is a different type of education, but they are as so it's. They don't, in a way, they don't talk as equal, I have to say, and I found that problematic sometimes, because it's, history tells you that good projects come from good communication and good exchanges between the people working in the building. No? So, and I think we lost that. We have segregated the professions in a way that there is not that connection, and you just are planted on the side on the project, and it's just very still separated. And I don't know, in terms of our, you know, what we could do to improve that. For instance, Professor Gallego Roca, in the course that you have is architects, right? Or it's only for students of architecture? Do they get to engage with craftspeople, or lavorano anche gli studenti d'architettura anche come ci mostrava la collega Giovanni, che anche il lavoro pratico di fare la costruzione, la preparazione, anche gli studenti vengono confrontati con questo, o solo tra gli architetti?
No, nell'università non è facile queste pratiche. solamente c'è qualche lavoro, qualche studente attraverso l'università può fare di collaborazione, ma con tutta la fase amministrativa, perché anche la sicurezza, tutte queste cose, anche, ma noi sempre lavoriamo in posto. Questo anno è un palazzo di influenza rinascimentale, un piccolo paesaggio di Andalusia. Sì. Il viaggio è fondamentale, l'approccio al luogo. Questo nella Spagna c'è della istituzione libera di insegnamento che fa il viaggio, conoscere il tuo paese e ama il tuo paese. Prima, amare il paesaggio, l'architettura, conoscere. Il restauro, io credo, il professore ha parlato, è un problema di cultura, è un problema lungo. Io domando la prima questione: conosce Torres Valvas? Nessuno conosce il Star System, ma non chi ha fatto la conservazione della labbra. Andate, vedete, questo si chiama la labbra, non è Nazarino, non è rinascimentale, è opera del restauro anche. E questa penso è una domanda a farla. Il restauro comincia a essere, è stato sempre parte della storia dell'architettura, Violetta. Abbiamo visto il professor Blassi come la documentazione, valorizzare, documentare, comincia per queste fasi. E questa è una responsabilità universitaria. E credo che l'Italia è un esempio nel secolo XX, da Giovanni e tutte le strutture, e per noi è la referenza, certamente, perché conservare e guardare il futuro, conservare e vedere il progresso della civilizzazione e vedere la responsabilità dell'amministrazione. Oggi nessuno parla della Spagna di cultura. Se parla, è certo un grave problema della via, se parla di confrontazione, se parla di tante cose, ma di cultura, e questa è una responsabilità dei giovani. La prima responsabilità dell'università è per fare un uomo più libero, più culto.
Basically, I believe that we need to target different groups, university students, craftspeople, public, whatever. And for each target group, we need to find out some standard basic level of knowledge and skills. In my experience, I think too that at the university, my students do not have the cognitive skills as Christina is mentioning, so it's difficult for them to be prepared for the profession. We need a standard basic minimum knowledge and awareness, but it's only for the university students. Our committee is responsible for the whole population. Therefore, we need different levels of standard basic knowledge and skills. That's how I believe, and that's how the capacity building guidelines are structured. So we need to make these the guidelines as understandable as Emeritus says, as comprehensive as possible, but for different target groups, it should be collaborated. That's how I believe it should be.
Hello, I'm very conscious that we're at quite a pivotal moment really in terms of architectural education, and with climate change, we're much more aware now of the embodied energy of historic buildings, and this is something particularly in historic England we're looking at very strongly. One particular case, a building on London's Oxford Street, has really opened people's eyes to the value of this. The point that really Ingvar has been making for many years, architects are trained in new build, but not enough on building conservation. So that 50% will leave their school and be expected to work on old buildings, but they will not be prepared for that I think that figure now is growing. There is potentially going to be a presumption in favour of retention when buildings come in for planning in England. That's a big step. So if architects want work, they need to be able to work with old buildings. The opportunities are growing, and the architectural training needs to improve to accommodate that. Talking to Tamar, it sounds like Japan has a better step ahead there. In fact, it's more built in than it is perhaps in Britain. But a very important point. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, David. So Tamar is architects in Japan have studied conservation in undergraduate level?
Well, I'm still learning, but from what I can say from my experience is that as a graduate of one of the Japanese universities is that when you study architecture, you also go through the course of architectural conservation, and it's part of the curriculum. I think that's because the modern architecture and the philosophy of conserving historic buildings are not so much different in Japan, and everything centers around the wooden architecture. And whether it's building or conserving, they use the same philosophy, same methods, same approaches. So the traditional approaches to conserving the wooden architecture and the modern approaches are not so different. That's why in Japan it's not so, there's not such a big gap between the conservators and the architects. And also one more point is that they have built a very good system of licensing the architects who can actually involve in the repair and conservation works. You have to go through to a certain amount of hours of learning in order to become in charge of repairing a site. And so they have two different levels. One is the nationally licensed conservation architects, for which you have to study for all your life, basically. And there are like 150 people only in the whole Japan who can become in charge. You can be supervising the cultural heritage properties which are listed cultural heritage properties. And then they have this the system of heritage manager system, and these architects also are like very high class architects who also go through very high level of education, but they have less hours of study, and they become in charge of conserving, managing, utilizing the buildings which are not designated as important cultural properties, but just as listed, less, let's say, less important buildings. So, and one point just to add is that in Japan they don't have the written guidelines of how to conserve buildings, which was quite shocking for me because I come from European background, but there is no document, there is no written resources, and everything goes down in apprenticeship system, which ensures that they preserve not only the buildings but the knowledge of how to conserve, and it also includes the carpentry tools, the knowledge, the skills, the know-how. So these architects get together, they have meetings, they have annual meetings, and they share the knowledge. So this is how the tradition goes on. So I think all the systems has to be developed according to the tradition, the cultural traditions of each country. And in Japan, this is how it really works quite well. So we also in ACCU have this challenge of, okay, in Japan we do it in this way, but how do we deliver this system to someone who is from Bhutan, from Vietnam, and they don't have this? Well, they attend our lectures and our courses, but as you said, they don't have the basic skills of, for example, making sketches or drawing. So it's been quite challenging for us as well to build a curriculum and to design the curriculum. So yeah, it's a good opportunity for me as well to hear all the opinions from me. So yeah.
Yeah, for example, the course I did, Professor Carbonara, was exam. So to enter, there's a fixed numbers and you have to do exam. So you have to demonstrate you have that basic knowledge. And when I first created a master, I wanted to do that because it looked to me quite right to do that and say, okay, then I know who, but in Britain we don't do that. So what then I ask is the portfolio and a personal statement. They say why they want to do the course, and it kind of works. But it's just the thing that different places, different usages. And in Japan, of course, the architects we know from Japan are Tadawando and the ones that you knew. So I don't know really that group of architects, what other, do they do new architecture as well, or they only do conservation?
No, of course they do, because when you come to Japan and you see all these new modern buildings, there are some elements which are based on very like traditional Japanese system of like having these bracket systems and joinery methods, especially in building
But
conservation.
it's traditional design rather than contemporary one.
Modernized traditional system, and as I said, it's not so different. It's not so different from the traditional ones. Yeah. So the philosophy is the same. You really underlying traditional architectural forms, but trying to repeat and sort of bring it into the modern architecture so that the skill is not lost. So this is how Japan is really doing its best in conservation.
But then when you have these international students coming from other traditions, so you try to kind of, they go into the Japanese way to do it, or you recognize the characteristics, the national characteristics, and you cater for that?
We have to, because as I said in my presentation, Japan's architecture is fully timber, and one of the customs in Japan's conservation is that since it's a post-mortem structure made with joinery, it's very easy to dismantle and then repair the members and then rebuild again, which for some students coming from I don't know, Chinese or Vietnamese backgrounds, as I said, they don't do this because they have mixed buildings mixed with the stone, mixed with brick, and this is something really shocking. Like even moving the buildings, like in Japan, it's very common to demolish one building and build it in another. But the values will be maintained because, as I said, it's not the material that matters, but the method of construction and the skills and the tools which were used to construct this or that building. So yeah, it is a bit weird for them when they first hear this, but then, as I said, they can pick up some elements which are interesting for them, which can also work in their countries, and then they try to implement these methods in their countries. So that's one of those things that we're trying to share with them.
I open also, so the audience online, are there any questions? Okay. You want to read?
Should I go on like that? Mark Pique Gascon is asking a question for Javier and Christina. We have heard about the accreditation in the UK as explained by Sean Riley and Ava Maxwell. I understand there is nothing similar in Spain unless I'm wrong, but there has been a dialogue in the past. What is the current view or your view in Spain regarding any future professional accreditation for architects? Gracias.
No solo, ti chiedono qual è la nostra, come vediamo in Spagna, avere un sistema simile di accreditazione per il restauro, architetti accreditati nel restauro. ¿Qué pensamos?
Acreditación en España, la formación.
Come quello che ha presentato.
No, in Spagna l'accreditazione, per esempio, professionalmente, un concorso è la base economica.
So it says the money.
Sì, tu non fai studi preliminari con l'intensità che richiede, se tu è convinto, per insegnare agli studenti deve rinunciare a fare le contraddizioni. Non so se è chi Venturi chi fa complessità e contraddizione nell'architettura, complessità e contraddizione nel restauro. E penso è un compromesso nell'università. Insegnare è una responsabilità, per me è grande, perché solo è difficile, è tanto difficile fare il restauro. E di teoria si può imparare. C'è un simile, se un chirurgico fa una biblioteca enorme e qualche giorno prima di fare un intervento si dice al chirurgico che la medicina, la formazione. Tutto questo è scritto, c'è scritto, ma domani c'è un intervento. Cosa fa? Si apprende facendo, ma è una responsabilità la preparazione e questa sapere le esperienze di altri almeno per me è molto importante vedere altri, contrastare. È una delle ragioni che sono con Cristina qui, noi da sempre. L'Italia è stato per me, è aperto le occhi a una cultura che io in Spagna non conoscevo. E questa formazione, chi fa? La Spagna non c'è una formazione specifica, la facoltà di architettura. Questo parlava Torres Balbás. Ci sono buoni architetti nel moderno, ma che non hanno questi rapporti con l'archeologia, con il restauratore, con il botanico, con le discipline. Penso che prima c'è la umiltà di non sapere le cose che altre professioni conoscono bene. E un'altra importanza è questo che nel modo modesto io ho un po' spiegato. Intorno a una figura abbiamo fatto nella facoltà la prima materia autonoma del progetto, restauro, Granada, e dopo un seminario intorno a un personaggio, architetto importante come Torres Balbás. Ma è come la pioggia. La pioggia cade è umido quando c'è tempo. Non si può. Spagna in questo credo che è una responsabilità di fare tanto per il paesaggio. No? Io parlavo oggi di Roberto Pani, che più che una tecnica è una filosofia. Almeno per me questa filosofia sempre è molto importante, no? Perché cosa dice Violet, cosa dice Raskin, cosa dice Giovannoni, Boito, tanti personaggi della cultura europea hanno detto tante cose e anche quante cose ha detto oggi nel suo bibliografia Carbonara, no? Marconi, Decibardeschi, sono persone che è stata costruita una cultura del secolo XX e XXI e questa domanda, professor Carbonara, la faccio a lei, che ha l'esperienza. Cosa pensa della cultura del restauro dopo il secolo XXI? Le nuove generazioni, i nuovi cittadini di tanti paesi, cosa sarà il restauro dal suo punto di vista? Cosa diventerà? E vediamo la più concreta. Dal restauro stilistico, dal restauro scientifico, dal restauro critico, dal critico conservativo, qual è la strada che lei crede che sarà più conservativa e più l'insegnamento andrà più a una... Anche il mondo informatico cambierà il restauro, la informatica, i mezzi tecnici, non so, che penso è un'opportunità di una referenza sull'insegnamento, come diventerà nel futuro.
Non abbiamo trapolato, professore, piccola domanda.
No.
Solo tradurre un attimo.
Bella domanda, sì, sì.
Un attimo solo tradurre per...
Faccia.
So he's making a very big question to Professor Carbonara, asking him how he thinks conservation, architectural conservation will look like in 21st century with all these current changes that we have, and so I will address it. Professore, quando vuole.
Eccomi, si sente bene la voce? Sì, perché io sento così e così. Si sente? Cristina? Si sente la voce?
Non mi sente a me? Che ha il microfono? Sì. Chi ha il microfono?
La domanda che ha fatto il professor Gallego Roca è impegnativa. Io casualmente mi sono trovato a scrivere un saggio sul restauro pensando al nuovo millennio, quindi all'inizio degli anni 2000. e per l'enciclopedia italiana. E mi domandavo appunto, nei termini che si è stato detto, quale linea potrebbe prevalere e via dicendo. Quello che però si vede oggi, secondo me, poi magari forse il professor Varagnoli potrà dire anche lui meglio di me il quadro italiano, quello che si vede oggi, ho l'impressione che sia una regressione della cultura che è alla base del restauro, quindi di una cultura storica. Quindi ho l'impressione che si andrà avanti forse con delle punte di buon restauro, in certi casi, ma soprattutto con un prevalere gli aspetti pratici ed economici sugli altri. Si vede anche negli orientamenti del nostro Ministero, dove appunto la valorizzazione è esaltata rispetto alla conservazione e via dicendo. Cristina, non so se vuoi tradurre questo, perché se no parlo troppo. Appunto.
No, sì, magari faccio
Sì.
un pezzetto.
Poi aggiungo qualcosa dopo.
So, says it's a complex question, and he's in fact writing something about it. Professore, ha detto che lo sta scrivendo in italiano, vero? Questa
Sì,
postura.
l'ho scritto tempo fa, sì.
Allora, he's has written about that, and in fact what he sees is a bit of regression, actually, where the economical aspects prevail, respect the rest. So it's a bit of pessimistic, professor. And in fact, this is no casual that I call this event advancing, because I'm very much aware of that regression. We feel it as well and worries us. Yeah. Professore, quando vuole continuare?
Sì. Ora, volevo fare una considerazione che mi è venuta in mente vedendo appunto i restauri archeologici, eccetera. Negli anni 70, 80 e 90, anni di buona vivacità nel nostro campo, io trovavo che gli architetti che lavoravano nelle soprintendenze archeologiche, allora erano separate da quelle architettoniche e artistiche, e mi riferisco proprio a Maria Letizia Conforto, a Gian Giacomo Martinez, a Giovanni Boglian, architetti operavano in restauro in maniera magnifica, superiore a quella dei colleghi che lavoravano nelle soprintendenze. E questo per quanto diceva il professor Galleco Roca, perché si trovavano in un ambiente culturalmente più vivace, a contatto con archeologi, con una cultura umanistica, storica, forte, che li stimolava a lavorare come architetti, ma consapevoli profondamente di quello che si faceva fare, cosa che io non riconoscevo invece nelle sovrintendenze ai monumenti, che erano più orientate verso tecniche, ripetizioni di modi e via dicendo così. Ecco. Questo per dire quanto appunto la vicinanza alla cultura storica, alla cultura in generale, così, sia fondamentale per poter poi fare le scelte di restauro, che sono sì scelte anche progettuali e tecniche, via dicendo. Un'altra osservazione un po' particolare riguarda un'esperienza nella scuola di specializzazione. Abbiamo avuto negli anni passati tanti architetti spagnoli e portoghesi. Molti di questi non avevano conoscenze storiche di restauro approfondite, ma erano tutti bravi architetti, buoni progettisti. E con un lavoro ulteriore fatto in sede di specializzazione sono diventati appunto, a mio parere, degli ottimi architetti restauratori. Lasciamo stare Cristina che è speciale, va bene?
Recording. Ok, traduco.
Questo è tutto. Sì.
Really interesting observation, and I think we are lucky to have now the very protagonist of the evidence of that, which is architects such as architect Conforto, that was at that time where architects operating within the Superintendencia Arqueológica, so the archaeological government body, were operating in a much higher level standard than those operating in the Justice Superintendencia for buildings. And it's because they were immersed in a culture, a humanistic, historical culture, that otherwise the others were more the techniques, so they were just straight into the technical, rather than reflecting on the history and the significance of the buildings. And I think that's a very important observation to make. And in fact, when we did, when I did the school, and I think they still have this, we have 2 weeks of archaeological excavation, and it's one of the things that really stay with me forever, because the methodology that archaeologists have is quite unique and defined, and thus I think is this kind of things to promote, in the studies and the, we have to teach the methodology, but I'm going beyond the translation, sorry. And then what he say is also very interesting, because what he says, many Spanish or Portuguese architects came to do the school of specialization with very little knowledge of history. But they were very good architects in the first instance. So they knew well their skills as architects, and then they learned about history. So they gave them a very good basis for them becoming excellent conservation architects. So I think these are very, very substantial contribution observations that I think is the kind of things to take forward. And again, in the search for this evidence of things that we know have worked or no, I think it's very important. Professore, quando vuole, si vuole.
Andiamo avanti.
Sì? Vuole fare altre osservazioni? O?
No. Pensavo proprio ai progetti di Santa Maria di Paganica che ha presentato il professor Varagnoli, no? I ripensamenti continui progettuali, no? Non c'è una esplicitazione della teoria, ma c'è una ricerca che chiaramente ha un riflesso teorico. E mi piaceva molto la prima soluzione, quella dei 3 livelli di lettura. E poi Varagnoli ha chiuso invece con la richiesta dei preti di come era dov'era, diciamo. È interessante tutto questo arco così, ma la prima proposta era molto significativa, perché conservava, spiegava, aiutava a capire, no? E in una maniera essenziale, senza eccedere. Basta, questo è tutto.
Grazie tante, professore. Which language? we hope this is the first meeting, let's say, of opening a conversation that we would like to have it annual or biannual, or start reflecting, because I think it's needed, and maybe collectively we can start refining this advancing rather than regression, how you say? Regression to of the field, because what I keep saying, we are standing literally on the shoulders of giants, and all this culture of conservation, architectural conservation has been created. It's just we cannot really go backwards, and I think we need to resist very much, and we need to do whatever is necessary to go forward and to communicate perhaps better, but also to create our teaching or learning more relevant to what is happening today, and engage more, not thinking like, for example, retrofitting is something different, or just bringing them to what we know, and it's a complex. So I don't know, are there other questions online? No. There's one. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Soraya is asking, in Portugal, any architect may be responsible for an architectural conservation project. Is a question of accreditation and concern in charter initiative, and I think she refers to if it's an official concern in conservation in general.
Maybe we can bring Soraya. Soraya, yeah, there.
Maybe she can.
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, you want to make the question directly?
Yes, I would like to know if there are some initiatives international about this concern on accreditation of architects and engineers working in restoration and conservation projects. Because it should be mandatory to have knowledge to work on this field, but in Portugal it is not. So I would like to know what is, and if there's some survey about in which countries is this happening, And if it's the same in other countries, I don't know. I would like to know if it's normal, that it's not mandatory to have formation in conservation.
Thank you.
To work, to be responsible for projects.
Thank you. We heard now in Japan, so I think I kept saying in UK, but I think we can find maybe in other places there is also this accreditation, but in Val, if you want to.
I wonder if we might try to put this into at least a preliminary understanding of what is happening on the ground at the moment. Pre-COVID, the UK government was promoting the view that somewhere in the region of £10 billion per annum was being spent on building. Of that, under £6 billion was on new build, and over £4 billion was being spent on the existing building stock, with all its challenges. There's also a general understanding that the practitioners that are operating on the field at the moment have been virtually educated in new build with very little awareness of how to deal with the built heritage, which of course is one of the reasons why I think that accreditation of peer review processes is important. And as I mentioned, we've now somewhere in the region of over 9,000 individuals who have been accredited across the UK and Ireland in conservation understanding. But given the statistics that I've just pointed out, that under £6 billion is spent in new build, over £4 billion is spent, pounds that is, on the existing building stock. And there is an appreciation that practitioners, generally speaking, are educated in new build. A simple argument, and it is naive up to a point, is that about 40% of practitioners are not prepared for the work they do. Is that the reality in other countries? Because if it's moving in that direction, that is a driver to change along the lines of what I was suggesting earlier about interpreting conservation from the high end down through the ranks of the practitioners to the craftsmen in such a way that there is a unified understanding of the language, aims and intentions of conservation. And that would include engineers. And there are two schemes for engineers that are operating in the accredited field.
Yeah, I totally agree with all the interventions now. It's interesting, in my opinion, to remember that, at least in Italy, there has been a moment of the separation between historiography and restoration. I mean that until the 80 years, our faculty was founded on the strong unity. In the center of the investigation, there was the building in its reality. So the structures, the financing, the history, it was all together, and it was possible to give a large range of preparation to the students. After the 80s and 90s, especially in modern historiography, was born a kind of suspect against restoration. I remember always the important interview that Manfredo Tafuri gave to Casabella, one of the most important Italian journal of architecture, pointing the difference between the architect, restorer. The model was Carlo Scarpa, that is the transformation of building, and the conservationist, the conservator of the architecture, which must only be a technical. So this unity between the knowledge of material consistency of the building and the knowledge of historical humanistic was broken. And in Italy, it was very evident that a lot of historians, especially, followed this indication by Manfredo Furi. And I think that in Italy it was a great separation after that. And also can explain the suspect against the structure in our formation, because it's true, modern, recent architecture, recent students have not the knowledge of the structure. Sometimes they don't understand the reality, the materiality of the architecture. They prefer to study by internet, by web, maybe, instead of going there and make surveys and touch and enter and feel the architecture. So inspiration from an intellectual point of view, and inspiration also because, let's say, a bad use of digital instruments don't help to create a great root for modern restoration. So maybe the situation is the situation that Carbonara was pointing out, how do you say, the rupture of the ancient ties between the different disciplines who sustained the cultural of restoration.
Thank you very much. Paul.
Thanks. Did you hear that? Okay. No, it's just taking up a point that that Debbie made, and hopefully that fits in with the general scene. And that's, you know, I think we're very conscious that the European Commission is concerned, like we are, with this whole sense of, you know, how are we dealing with the historic built environment in its totality, and the issues as they're seeing it is, and this is what's interesting, if you look at all the recent material coming out of Brussels, it's talking about the economic, social and environmental benefit. And I think the shock to us all was that they mentioned economic, because we would always have laboured on the view, oh, economically, this can't be dealt with. But I think that battle is won. I feel, well, I can only speak in the European context, that battle is won. So actually, we're now faced with the challenge of looking at what Christina has been doing through CIF, is to how can we act to, in a way that practice and what I call providers, practice and education providers, have to take a realistic view as to how they're going to deal with the challenge of coping with the built environment. I would like to think with the pluses that we're being told, it is an asset, but also I think the climate change and the whole issue of carbon, all of those elements that will strengthen our case, need to be coming out of the educational institutions. So, and need to be in the schools. That they are there already. I think actually we're late responding to what's actually out there. I'm conscious, I can only speak from my knowledge of the UK, but I am, and Ireland, but I am conscious that the building industry is equally conscious of these challenges and these issues. And I think you know, it would be unthinkable that we would not think. I think it was put very well by Sean this morning. We're in the marketplace, whether we like it or not. If we're to survive, we're in the marketplace. So the kind of models that we're looking about have to be market driven. They have to work in this way. But equally, the one big thing we have is well, hopefully, we're all acting in the common good. We're not like other areas of the marketplace. And hopefully that's a selling factor for us.
Yeah, thanks for
That's all I would say.
Paul, because that's quite crucial. And actually, English Heritage has a great series called Heritage Counts, which actually they try to show these values in that, because it's the only language that decision makers understand. And I think one of the key problems is that we haven't been engaging with that conversation maybe as much as we should. So that it feels like we are not relevant, or conservation is not relevant. But as I say, it's just intense to open the discussion. And if we, so although we are around,
we could discuss the issue under 3 main headings. For example, the aims, values, concepts, principles, ethics. This might be the first heading. The second one could be methodology and strategies, how we do this thing. A third one could be challenges, opportunities, and maybe measures that could be taken. For example, for climate change, for lack of dialogue, for sustainability. These could be the challenges and the opportunities to be considered along with the methodology of education and training. So for each problem, we need to consider all aspects of education and training. That may be a way to.
Yeah, this, I think Kamal was talking about this, setting the level of the education and making discrete parts. I think is what we need to start in this very complex thing. How you take one at a time, and at least you start with the small winnings, and you can get somewhere. But yeah, I think in a way we keep talking, we make it even more. And the idea was to get to some sort of conclusions. And what if there are no other questions online in the room? No. So what I'm going to ask each of the speakers is, in this decalogue that we just said, that was actually architect Conforto that have proposed as outcome of this meeting to set this decalogue, but I'm not very keen in putting another document and having even more pollution. So it's going to be kind of working document or outlining something that could be then modify as it goes. So not set and published in that way, but kind of a moving document. So if I start, maybe start Sean and ending with Professor Carbonara, what do you think if we were going to put this decalogue to advance architectural conservation? What point do you think is the most important to set there? Professore, non so se mai sentito.
No.
Come finale, quello che chiedo a ogni speaker, in questo decalogo che l'architetto Conforto ha proposto che facciamo come una bozza, diciamo, non come un documento così finito, ma come un'apertura alla discussione. Allora chiedo attorno agli speakers di fare ognuno un punto che pensa che è un punto fondamentale a mettere questo decalogo. Allora cominciamo da Sean e finiremo con lei. Si va bene?
Io vi devo lasciare fra un po', quindi forse direi
allora, facciamo la rovescia, cominciamo.
Appunto così. Ma io penso che un elemento fondamentale per quanto riguarda il restauro architettonico, che è il tema di oggi, no? È quello di cercare di ragionare come si fa nel campo medico, no? Diceva la collega portoghese, no? Che tutti gli architetti possono fare restauro, anche in Italia è così, lo stesso. Così tutti i medici possono fare operazioni di qualunque tipo, ma non lo fanno, perché esistono il sistema delle specializzazioni, per cui uno non andrebbe a farsi operare il cuore da un dentista e via dicendo. Quindi io penso che un punto fondamentale sia quello di costruire una formazione universitaria o anche non universitaria, come abbiamo visto stamattina, sopra una buona formazione di base di architetto, che sia però di carattere specialistico. Ma è uno specialismo particolare, perché, come è stato detto anche, è aperto a tante discipline. Quindi è uno specialismo non specialistico, non monodisciplinare. È una capacità di dialogare con tante competenze e di, non dico entrare a fondo, ma capirle. Quindi questo terzo livello, come lo chiamiamo noi in Italia, non solo in Italia, potrebbe essere importante. Una raccomandazione in questo senso. Io non sarei per le forme semplificate, corsi di laurea in beni culturali architettonici, no, formazione di architetti e specializzazione dopo, nel senso che però ho detto, molto aperta, molto poco accademica, molto aperta anche alle professioni. Mi scuso se poi devo allontanarmi.
Sì. Grazie tante, in caso mai che deve andare, grazie tanto professore, parlo adesso della
Voi.
Professor Carbonara said that that is, we should really kind of put it as the doctors, the medical profession does it. So you don't want to be operated by your heart by a dentist. So why people don't understand that, you know, will require a particular specialization, and he's very much for a good, in the case, because today we discuss mainly architectural conservation, because it's important to be a good education as architect first, and then going into the specialist. Also in the dialogue and the understanding across different professions, then important to good outcomes in terms of architectural conservation. Thank you again, Professor. Ingvar, move to you. Oh, you start from, yeah, sorry. I thought that, because I was thinking it doesn't matter. That's okay.
I return to the issue of the top-down approach that I mentioned earlier. And it is a system that I know can work, because within TCRE, within the Study Scotland, I did mention we were commissioning research, but it went further than that, because once the research was presented, it was then translated by the researchers and practitioners into practitioner's guide. These in turn were again translated into technical advice notes, which in turn were supported by informed leaflets that were targeting the building owner. So there was a direct link through from research, through practice, through technology to and craft into owners. And colleagues then subsequently took that a stage further by introducing them into school children, so that we're beginning to see a link run right through the levels of interest that we're needing to be informed, based on reliable information, based on up-to-date information, based on interpretation, and based on adequate reinterpretation of it for the different levels of use. It worked before, and a variation on that, I would argue, could work in the future, that takes into account the regional and country variations of the heritage that they have, the materials that they're constructed from, the skills upon which they were built, the embodied energy that they entail, and more importantly, the continuing sustainability that the existing structures provide.
Thank you. Professor Gallego Roca, if you want to. Il punto, cioè, se dobbiamo fare questo decalogo, che punto tu pensi che sarebbe un punto importante da notare per andare avanti con il restauro architettonico, che punto si dovrebbe fare per l'educazione?
Io penso che è una cultura molto diversa per l'insegnamento universitario, non è lo stesso in Spagna, Portogallo, Francia, è molto diverso in Italia, ma penso c'è un referente in questo. Un buon architetto sempre penso che capisce la storia, che capisce il momento, è un buon restauratore. Buon architetto e buon restauratore. La domanda è, nelle nostre facoltà di architettura, la formazione dobbiamo instaurare un livello per tutti, non perché il buon alunno, il buon architetto in una facoltà a 15 giorni si vede chi ha questa la progettazione, la relazione con la sensibilità, questo diventa molto diverso. Ma in università dobbiamo cercare una formazione, almeno a un livello. E questo è diverso nel paese. Io penso che dobbiamo capire che il restauro e la conservazione esiste. L'architetto, chi fa la formazione, dopo è necessaria una specializzazione. Penso che ha parlato il professor Carbonara. Come ogni paese deve, Italia ha un sistema per il ministero che tutte le facoltà hanno una linea guida per la formazione e dopo una scuola di specializzazione. Anche penso che per lavorare nelle soprintendenze, non so, si deve fare la scuola di specializzazione. Non è necessario. Si può fare un architetto senza fare la scuola. Bene. In Francia è l'architetto
solo
obbligatorio. E questo non è possibile in Spagna per un sistema, perché è un po' elitismo, no? La Francia, questo sistema d'architetto in chef è visto e dobbiamo vedere anche la situazione. Questa formazione, io penso, ogni paese deve cercare una formazione in questo ambito, ma penso è un'esigenza, no? Perché è un ambito di formazione. Adesso io penso il modello inglese del master, ci sono master, il italiano, la scuola di specializzazione, c'è io che è diverso perché è, come abbiamo visto, è un'altra. Portogallo penso non c'è, e la Spagna c'è qualcuno master, ma non c'è al modo italiano. E anche io penso che la UIA, la Unione Internazionale d'Architetto, ricordo che fa una domanda a tempo per un indirizzo di, si può chiamare specializzazione, oggi ho visto, perché questa specializzazione anche per questa specializzazione ha il contributo di chiamare a altre discipline, allo storico, all'archeologo, al chimico, all'ingegnere, e architetto non è Superman. Non è Superman. Non può essere un Superman. Dobbiamo riconoscere che nella nostra professione una umiltà in fronte alla società. E anche questo che si impara nelle facoltà, studi preliminari, deve costituire una esigenza all'amministrazione. Perché? Perché si insegna una disciplina che si basa negli studi preliminari, non ha senso che l'amministrazione fa tavola rasa di questo. Per esempio, la Spagna è possibile che un architetto che ha fatto un progetto di un monumento importante può fare la direzione lavori a concorso. E questo è anche importante, che nella formazione deve fare una trasmissione alla pratica, perché non è una realtà che si fa un insegnamento che dopo la pratica anche è modificato. La Spagna è molto discorso se c'è l'architetto è specialista, no, si vede, è un architetto generalista. E questo penso che il postgrado è una via importante di educazione in questo campo. Almeno. Penso il modello italiano è molto difficile e altri paesi in questo momento. Ma il master, tipo master o tipo scuola di specializzazione, penso è un buon modello per gli architetti. Almeno per me questo è un po' l'impegno in Spagna di fare del restauro una formazione continua. Dopo penso anche buono, il modello di Spagna è buono dal punto di vista che nelle facoltà ha un componente tecnico importante, costruzione, strutture, e questo complemento specialistico dopo può essere interessante nel futuro, ma non solo in Spagna, penso a tante esperienze di altri paesi.
I will do just a little bit of translation because it's a lot I have content, but we are recording, so we will do some outcomes in English and hopefully Italian read. So you can read more extensive. And now I just, Professor Gallego Roca agrees with Professor Carbonara about the need to a basic good formation as architect and then doing a specialization. Talking the case of Spain, where an architect can access to directing works in a historical context, just through a competition without the need for any specialization. He mentioned that the Union of Architects, International Union of Architects, they made a call for also some specialization, but the main point he wanted to make is really the national differences and the fact that, you know, Italy, France, they were talking as where in order to work in conservation, you have to go through that school. It's very specific. So if this, and we have to be aware, and what the point he made about, you know, the lobbying, or we have to influence these policies, and I think that's why we're here, because in our city we have some leverage as well. We have some. We build on some reputation that our predecessors build up, and it's the kind of things we can try to say things that perhaps can go into the right place. But thank you very much. And as I said, we will do more extensive recording of your words later. Professor Blasi?
Yes, I apologize because I will speak in Italian, but I hope Cristina was able to translate in English. Io ho sempre paragonato il restauratore a un medico, ad un geriatra. Can you translate?
So, as how you say, geriatrist, the one geriatrist. You always compare a conservation architect or a conservation engineer to a geriatrist.
Un buon geriatra deve avere una conoscenza tecnica molto approfondita di tanti problemi, del cuore, dei polmoni, neurologico, e anche il restauratore deve avere una conoscenza di molti problemi, anche se non è uno specialista cardiologo, ma deve avere queste conoscenze.
So a geriatrist has to have the understanding or the knowledge about different, the heart or the various parts of the body, but it's not specialist knowledge, it's just the level of knowledge necessary for.
Un'altra cosa che deve avere un geriatra è una esperienza con i malati. Non si può fare il geriatra solo a livello teorico. Allora, per la didattica, per me è essenziale che gli studenti vadano a toccare le vecchie strutture. Io che insegno del restauro, il consolidamento, obbligavo gli studenti, per esempio, a fare il calcolo delle capriate. E gli studenti mi dicevano: finalmente abbiamo capito che cosa serve la scienza delle costruzioni, perché erano molto interessati a questo aspetto pratico.
So he thinks that, like the geriatrists that have to know the practice as well, is the practical aspects of conservation, so that are necessary to actually go to the buildings and the sites. And he asked, for example, the students a practical exercise of calculating trusses, and the students is when they really realize the understanding of construction, and they understood what construction was for.
Ma se il paziente muore, non c'è più bisogno del geriatra. Questo in Italia è un vero problema. perché noi abbiamo il terremoto e se un edificio crolla non si restaura più, è perduto.
In Italy, they have this issue with the earthquakes because the building is collapsed, destroyed, and then it looks like it's not necessary anymore.
E quindi tra le conoscenze che deve avere una persona che restaura, la conoscenza delle strutture, a mio avviso, è fondamentale. Non si può dipendere dal calcolo di un ingegnere che non conosce la storia di un monumento.
Point of view, he finds that to be able to calculate the structures and understand the structure is fundamental skill to have knowledge, because you cannot depend just from an engineer that does this, but without the architect understanding.
Quindi la conoscenza delle strutture è fondamentale. Ma Roberto Di Stefano, un compianto professore di restauro, diceva che il consolidamento sismico è innanzitutto indagine storica.
There was this professor Di Stefano that he was saying that the strengthening consolidation of a structure is above everything a historical knowledge.
Investigation. The structural analysis, the safety of the building is historical knowledge. E quindi bisogna avere anche una notevole conoscenza storica e l'esperienza deve aiutare a riconoscere le malattie. Ma bisogna conoscere le malattie e questo non sempre viene fatto nell'insegnamento.
So it's, you need to know the illnesses in order to be able to practice. Basically, and in the learning, the teaching doesn't happen often.
To finish, se noi guardiamo i trattati del 700-800, in questi trattati sono disegnate tutte le patologie degli edifici, cioè sono disegnati quelli che in italiano chiamiamo i meccanismi di dissesto, la spinta dell'arco, tutte queste cose sono disegnate. Ecco, è fondamentale che gli studenti di restauro conoscano le patologie strutturali degli edifici.
He said that in the 18th century, 19th century treatises, all the pathologies of buildings and mechanisms of decay were illustrated and communicated. And it's necessary that students know that, where now it's not the case.
Con questo io vi ringrazio. Thank you. I say goodbye because I have to. Excuse me.
Professore Blasi, we have the abbiamo la cena dopo, ma non ce la faccio.
Domani devo andare via presto.
Grazie tanto.
Grazie.
But I think
It's a children game that you pass.
no, that's more difficult, of course. Well, I think one of the most important things, in my opinion, is the sense of the past. Many architects today so kind of melancholy, maybe sometimes. If we have not this sense of the past, it's impossible to make restoration. So I think not only to the specialization after renovation, but especially from the ground formation. So a lot of history, general history, but only history of architecture, of course, history of art, especially history of literature, history of music, all the idea like in the ancient times. Because if we have not this kind of sense of yes, of melancholy, of past, or something of nostalgia, it's possible to make restoration. There are no reasons. There are only commercial reasons, only market, which is very important, but it's not restoration. It's not kind of attitude, in my opinion. I remember some discussions about the adaptive reuse, which is very interesting. I like a lot the results of this tendency, but it's completely different from our aim, I think. So sometimes we must reflect if our present is the only dimension where we can live, or we can live sometimes in other dimensions. And we can remember, so the importance of the memory of this attitude is the basis of restoration. And so for this reason, I think that architects must have this formation. Otherwise, it's better to find other occupation, other jobs, because there are many other jobs. So it's not necessary.
May outcome.
It's not necessary to be conservator or restorator. This is my opinion.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cristina,
Sì.
Ah, sì.
Al contrario, sì, stavo dicendo. Allora, il senso del passato, lui trova che questa è la cosa fondamentale insegnare, non so se insegnare, ma è fondamentale quello che facciamo, no? Se noi questo senso del passato, questa apprezzazione della memoria, quello che significa, non esiste, non c'è valore, non c'è... Cioè, lui trova questo essere il punto fondamentale per il nostro, e quello che dice che se non c'è questo, che ci sono tanti lavori altri che la gente può fare, che non devi fare il restauro, non puoi fare qualsiasi altro lavoro, ma no, questo è fondamentale. Giovanni.
Well, I repeat myself in my presentation. So I think knowledge for the students, knowledge, story, context, excavations, story of the airbase. We have studied, for the phases of the building construction. Practice on conservations. Try to copy the Asian practice. Try to copy. Team with different skills. Professional skills, different, working in team, using modern technology for in modern age students, have a good practice with modern technologies, which help us to comprehend, but they cannot replace our autoptic analysis of the moment.
Sorry, no, what the last thing you said?
Autoptic, sì, lo ripeto in italiano?
Ovviamente, in questo caso mi salvi.
Allora, no, dicevo che in quello che ho praticamente detto nella mia presentazione, la conoscenza è fondamentale per la conservazione. Per un architetto, penso, per il restauro e la conservazione del monumento, per la tutela, noi parliamo di quello, e non solo dal punto di vista storico, del contesto. Gli scavi sono una conoscenza, anche gli scavi archeologici, come dicevate anche giustamente prima voi, quindi io parlo da archeologa, quindi per forza, cercando poi di copiare la pratica sul cantiere, quindi la pratica è importante, toccare il monumento per conoscerlo sotto tutti gli aspetti. Noi come archeologi, per esempio, abbiamo la cattedra, nessuno sa questo, di topografia. Nel Dipartimento di Topografia a Roma, alla Sapienza, c'era, poi adesso c'è una lunga tradizione, il professor Cairoli Fulvio Giuliani, che ci insegna proprio l'analisi tecnica del monumento, il rilievo, quindi tutta la struttura, con tutti i problemi strutturali. Chiaramente non siamo architetti, non siamo ingegneri, però riusciamo a capire se c'è un cedimento fondale, per esempio di una fondazione di una struttura, poi scavando, insomma, va bene. E poi l'uso delle moderne tecnologie, perché oggi l'approccio degli studenti è diverso, lavorano in un altro modo, hanno un altro cervello rispetto a noi, non hanno le nostre conoscenze, ma you are very.
The brain, I don't know how is the scientific description, but yeah, definitely the digital, you see how they operate. with
Confidence,
digital, yeah.
yes. Okay. Quindi loro possono vedere magari meglio, no? Per esempio, prima quando ho parlato del LiDAR, no? Del Directional Branding. Quello, con il laser scanner tu puoi avere tutto il monumento velocemente, tutta la Villa dei Ventili, però poi ci vuole una conoscenza dietro per l'interpretazione del LiDAR. Non è che tu hai il LiDAR e hai tutta la, no? la villa, quindi hai capito tutto. Non è così, devi interpretare l'interpretazione.
So again, of course, I'm not an educator and I can only just speak of very few years of experience. And I'm going to offer my just opinion on certain things. So if there is a guideline or principles of conservation or ethical examination, I just want to say that it's important to have a holistic approach in a way to include the Asian approaches in any whatever guideline or ethical we create, because to be honest, up to now, not so many charters or approaches have been very useful in Asian context due to the differences in building material and in traditional culture differences, I would say. So we're having the holistic approach so that the traditional knowledge of conservation is that still exists in many countries, especially in the small remote islands in the Pacific. They do not disappear and they are not overlooked, what's more important, or dominated by the guidelines created by the handful of experts that create all these guidelines and charters. So this is one point, and another one would be, why not try to include the education architecture, education in the national legislation on cultural heritage, because again, drawing on Japanese examples, in the Japanese law on cultural heritage, it's not only the monuments and sites that are listed as a category of the types of heritage, but also living people who actually hold the ancient skills and knowledge and know-how of how to repair a roof, how to make a roof tile, how to thatch over the vernacular houses, or how to make a tatami mat, or how to make a washi paper. So these people are actually living cultural heritages, registered or designated as cultural heritage properties. So bringing things into the national level, into the law, may also, again, saying on the Japanese example, be a way to make some sort of standard in how do we maintain or how do we transmit the knowledge that we have in the conservation.
You have your very narrow charter on authenticity.
Narrow charter makes things a bit more difficult.
Yeah, we were together because
instead of making like the word of authenticity, like instead of explaining what it is, it even made it broader. So it made things even more difficult in order to, we cannot keep things into the one framework, of course.
Yeah, that's definitely, I think my personal, I think there are too many charters that need to be clarified, because we are from the field and sometimes we don't understand in full how that works. How we can expect anyone to use it for anything.
Yeah.
So I think we need to resist to put out any document that is not going to do something good. And I think that's where science can as well. We shouldn't really just produce things that, because people that don't know, because you give this stamp or appears like ICOMOS or whatever big organization, and people think that's the thing to follow, and it's, we have to be, I think, very conscious of how this is used or in this context, maybe with some notes, or like the medicine, to have these contraindications. When you do that, I don't know. But,
Sorry, Christina, I think Soraya has raised her hand there.
Who's that? Soraya. Soraya, just coming for Soraya. If we don't see you, just open the microphone. And...
Hi, Christina. I'm sorry, I cannot hear you very well, but something I understood, and I wanted to clarify my intervention, because there's something that concerns me. It's because just to tell you what's happening in Portugal is this. We made a survey in 2018 about the courses in architecture, in integrated master in architecture, and also integrated master in engineering. And the question, and also archaeology. And the problem is that all these courses, normally they have, well, one curricular unity about conservation, or sometimes none. That means that the architect or the engineer or the archaeologist, when they end the courses, they never sometimes heard about conservation or methodology or even the meaning of authenticity. They don't know what's that. And in the end, they will work on these kind of projects. And also in professional level, in the workers, we don't have a specialization or knowledge or formation for traditional constructions and techniques, how to deal with wood, how to deal with stone. So they don't know how to make a lime mortar. So it's a problem because I follow some works, I made some projects, and there's a lot of problems in the field. And so the question is that we made in ICOMOS Portugal a meeting with all the directors of the courses in architecture, and they say they cannot add more courses or more curricular unities in the course because there's a lot of disciplines. It's impossible to add more, what I understand very well, and what Professor Carbonara said, I also agreed it should be in specialization level. But if we don't say that it should be mandatory to have the accreditation, who are going to inscribe in specialization? And who is going to make the course or formation to deal with wood? Or the engineers, they just learn concrete. Yeah. And how they are going to the field and how they are going to project, they just project concrete or steel. So it's a problem everywhere. And of course, architects are not God. We cannot do everything, but we should control this to don't be in the situation that we have facadism in all our cities. They are demolishing the buildings, the historical buildings, because it's not the question that we have to know history. We have history in the courses, but they have to understand what is authenticity and what is integrity and what are the principles of conservation. That's just an appointment I wanted to say, because maybe I was not very clear. We have a survey and we have a concrete date about this problem. It's urgent to have a solution.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me, Soraya?
Yes, I hear you.
Thank you very much for that. Yeah, there's very much at the core, and I think I will be actually, Tamar, the engineers in Japan, do they also, are they trained in historic construction?
Yeah, it's not separated with architectural engineer, architectural conservator, used in a synonymous way.
But structural engineers, like.
Actually, if you're an engineer or if you're an architect who is supervising the conservation works, you have to have a background in engineering.
Yeah, but they do within the mainstream engineering. They also study historic structure.
Yes.
Yeah, because in case steel and concrete, a little bit some professors maybe timber. So I think it's a general problem with Soraya, what you are confronting in Portugal. But I think this survey you have done is interesting. I think we need to do, in order to have some evidence, we need to really have a good picture of exactly where, how, and I think was instead of the geopolitics, the geo education towards conservation, I think to have that, to put some locations and numbers, and will give us some good work. Sean.
Over, yeah.
So,
thanks. I suppose I agree with pretty much everything that was said in terms of the different takes and angles, including if you don't want to be or you don't really, if you're a conservation architect or a restoration architect, you really shouldn't be doing it. That's really right. So yeah, that's absolutely one side. The other side is the holistic take that was being mentioned as well, where we're looking at seeing the building, the area around the building, the planning context, the place context, seeing these in the round rather than just looking at the particular area that you're working with, so that you're able to see the bigger picture of what's involved. And I think the IHBC recognises postgraduate conservation courses like yours, and what you're really doing, I suppose, is in a year trying to pick up on the whole profession and specialism, and it is impossible, but you do give the absolutely essential pointers that people can build on to have that kind of rounded take that will inform their specialist area if they develop into a specialist area, or if they go into a more to go back to the health service analogy, if they go back into a more general practitioner sort of role, because to pick up on Professor Carbonara's point earlier on, you don't want to be, you know, have anyone but a heart surgeon operate on your heart. Equally, I don't think you particularly want a heart surgeon nursing you better after you've been worked on by the heart surgeon. So that there are different skill sets involved in these areas, and I think that sense of being aware of the different levels is something we have to take on board when we're looking at conservation, which takes us from everything from maintenance and care of fabric through retrofit and all the issues around that, right up into the high-end care of building and fabric in the context of World Heritage Sites and the highest designations in a country, while also taking account of the different philosophies that are there, because of course those vary as well. So I think there is a huge consistency in what's being spoken about, but also an important, very critical need to take account of the breadth of roles that are encompassed within the conservation sphere.
Thank you very much. And actually, you brought me to think about, because we talk education, architect, and then the specialization, but actually after, then they have to go to a place where they can also practice where they are having taught. And I think that's one of the things that also is kind of lacking, because it's fundamental. I was so lucky that when I finished, I won a competition, I could do a conservation work that was, despite that now it doesn't exist, this kind of competition that a young graduate can access to, or, and I think that's one of the issues as well. And I see that very much part of the education and training. Absolutely, it's no, doesn't stop there. And if they don't do that, then it's not going to be progress towards, you know, what we have seen today, this practitioner. So how is that implemented? There are some, for example, masters have these internships afterwards, but you know, it's very problematic that, and I think, and it's where, you know, so we need to go high and ask government to create these funded places to create this professional. The college shadow is very government and it's very, but in a way maybe it's too academic. So to place after doing a specialization, students in practice, like Professor Blasi with this younger maybe engineer, or that, I think that's important, very important to follow up from the education that is more formal education. So that's something that to think about. Okay. Any other final last call? Last order? Nobody wants to, no? Apologize about this language thing. I was invited in Palermo to give some lectures, and I call it the CDS, the Babel Tower, because I thought architectural conservation is about Babel Tower in terms of people talking about conservation restoration. And then I was thinking I created my own Babel Tower today with all these multiples. But don't worry, this is totally a post event where we will try to translate the things that were not translated. The videos will be made available, the presentations, if the speakers agree, we can put the slides also available on the website. So we try to disseminate as much as possible. And then in this decalogue of this document, we try to have a kind of working document that people can contribute. And just I'll call you to come next year or in 2 years, we see how we can do this. To continue the conversation, because I think it's one of the important things that we have to really get together and show some muscle into the field. Because if we don't show, you know, we are here and we do these things and we know what we are talking about, and this has to be done, and we can give a clear list. We keep complaining, but we don't give really. And there's people that, you know, can make something. There are things that are not difficult to do if we tell we are specific about we need that there. Like that and cost that much money, can you do it? And then they will say probably yes. And I think it's the thing we need to do basically to avoid the regression that Professor Carbonara was talking about. I think it's very, very important that we work together for that. So thank you very much. At 8 o'clock we have the dinner. Maybe you can make it to the hotel if you want to refresh or have a coffee or stay or talk with others or whatever. But it's at 8. And it's in the roof terrace. Simone is not here. Someone, I think it's the same building. It's the Hotel Lauros, and it's the roof terrace. I hope you all have communication with others that nobody gets lost. And if not, come to me and give you my mobile phone, and you can do that. So thanks so much, everyone.